John Cage was an American music composer, artist, writer. He started composing in the 30s and working on into the 40s and 50s and visual production in the 60s and writing all at the same time and even curating in the 90s. John Cage is primarily known as a music composer. His most famous piece is 4 minutes and 33 seconds, in which the pianist came out, sat at the piano, and for 4 minutes and 33 seconds just sat there. It was about making the ambient noise around as much a part of the music as what would have been played on the piano. And a lot of that theme of working life into art, whether it be music or fine arts, was really what John Cage was about. The exhibition Not Wanting to Say Anything About Marcel, an artwork by John Cage, is meant to spotlight and highlight this one artwork. The way it will be installed is how it was installed in 1970. In the 60s, he was a composer in residence at the University of Cincinnati, and art patron Alice Weston kept prompting him to make some form of visual art. In 1968, John Cage's good friend and fellow artist Marcel Duchamp died, and it was in 1969 that John Cage created Not Wanting to Say Anything About Marcel. An arts magazine was prompting artists and friends and people involved in the art world to say something about Duchamp. And John Cage and Jasper Johns were sitting around, and Jasper Johns was asked as well. And Jasper Johns had said, "I don't want to say anything about Marcel." And Cage took that as his title for his first foray into visual arts. The artwork is comprised of 4 plexigrams and one of 2 lithographs, depending on which set you got, A or B. Each plexigram is a wood base with 8 sheets of plexiglass inserted into slots on the top. And on each of those sheets of plexiglass are images and text that had been determined by a set of chance operations that John Cage set up beforehand. So using the I Ching, the Chinese Book of Changes, he had this vast system of 46 questions with 64 possible outcomes, and then he used those questions to determine what word would be used, how it would be used, what color it would be, what size, what angle, and then when they determined what words would be used, he would hand those over to the graphic designer Calvin Summonson, who then worked with lithographic printers Erwin Hollander and Fred Genus, and they silkscreened the images and the text onto the plexiglass. Cage was the one kind of determining how things would be placed, but he was relying on these other people to kind of help him craft the final outcome. So as you're looking at the plexigrams, some of the aspects become more interesting because there's color text or some of the images are broken. What you find yourself doing is really kind of your eye wanders around. There isn't a main focus. You jump from word to word and layer to layer, image to image, and you start to make your own context for the words and the images contained on the plexigrams. The negative space, I think, plays a big part in which, depending on the person or depending on which angle you walk up to the artwork from, it becomes a different experience each time for each individual. At one point, Duchamp remarked on how the most evocative street signs are the ones which letters are missing, because he said it's fun to put them back together and a new meaning comes out of these words. He relied a lot on humor and puns and so forth. So I think Cage was kind of taking this sense of play and humor with words to kind of recontextualize them. I think those ideas of Cage's in which everything becomes art are what the viewer is going to come away from. Or, I mean, the title says it all, really. Not wanting to say anything about Marcel. And Cage, at the time, he didn't want to say anything, and he leaves the viewer's interpretation of the artwork so open. I think Cage really is able to say everything about Marcel, at the same time not actually having to define it with a sentence and a period at the end. He leaves it open-ended so that he says everything.